Hello and good day. Thank you for joining me as I will be presenting to you a historical presentation on the lead up to the formation of Malaysia, or the merger as we call it, between North Borneo, Sarawak, Singapore and Malaya. Now, Brunei plays a part in the formation of Malaysia, although in the end they opt out of joining the merger. First of all, I would like to thank Institute Development Studies of Sabah, or IDS, for collaborating with me on this project in 2023. Now, one of the things that we have to our advantage is hindsight today, where we can look back on decisions made in the past. You need to approach this with a very open mind, listen to all three parts, all three episodes, and then make your own conclusion from it. So the files are based on internal diplomatic communications between various embassies and high commissions in Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Jakarta, Manila, Washington, D.C., London. It also includes high commissions as well. What you have are diplomats communicating and sharing observations and intelligence reports to their foreign officers, foreign missions, what is going on in North Borneo, for example, what's going on in Sarawak, what's going on in Jakarta with regards to Indonesia's unhappiness with this plan for a merger. And then the Philippines comes to the fore as well, as they then face a lot of pressure internally, politically, to intervene and to stop this merger as well. So there are a number of things going on, and what I have tried to do is to stick to the information specifically on North Borneo and how it affects the future as far as North Borneo is concerned. There are some elements of Brunei in the podcast series, as it is important to the bigger question of why didn't Brunei join, why didn't Brunei participate in the merger. So that will be an interesting perspective as well. So these 9,000 documents are essentially top secret files that were released to the public a number of years ago, in which I had access to them, and I was able to go through them over an 11-month period and to sort of figure out what the narratives were, what was going on, what were the embassy staff, intelligence staff, what were they observing, what was going on in Kuala Lumpur, in Jakarta, in Singapore, even in Kuching, Brunei, and Jesselton as well, and are not forgetting Manila, and how everybody is reacting to this plan for a merger. And so what you have in these reports are personal interviews, private interviews, and you have intelligence reports giving an observation of what's going on, reports on press clippings, press statements, speeches. What do these speeches what are the narrative for these speeches by individual political leaders like Lee Kuan Yew and Tunku Abdul Rahman, Donald Stevens, and so forth. And it's very fascinating because a lot of the information is not available in the public sphere. And once you start putting all these narratives together, things start to become quite obvious as to the reasons why North Borneo could never achieve true real independence in 1963, and why the leaders of North Borneo were under tremendous pressure from a number of personalities to merge and to be a part of this formation of a new nation called Malaysia. And so these files give great insight and information that we never previously had. For all the documents in all the archives around in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, we've never had this kind of access and this kind of real understanding of the real world around what is going on in North Borneo or outside of North Borneo, and how a number of things influenced the decision of the British government to push ahead for a merger and to move away from this idea of a Borneo bloc, which is superseded by this merger and formation of Malaysia. So all this is very important. And we also then need to look at the world around Great Britain and what's going on and some of the problems that they face internally and externally as well in the mid-1950s, and what the precedent is, because for every action there is a reaction, and for everything that happens that period of time that Britain does, there is not necessarily a positive outcome. In some instances, they are forced on the back foot and they have no choice but to take action, and for economic, for political and diplomatic reasons. The British administrators, the British colonial administrators, for the most part, were generally cooperative, and many had accepted, embraced, and assimilated to some degree with the cultures and the peoples of Sabah. And if you look at the Sarawak documents as well, the same holds true there as well. However, in the end, I think we have to accept the fact that the final decision on the future of the Borneo territories at Sabah and Sarawak, and to a lesser extent Brunei, these decisions were not made in Kuching or Jesselton, but in London by politicians, many of whom had never been to Asia or to Borneo. So they could never understand what the people wanted, could never understand the culture, the views on life, and how little natives and the people of Sabah or North Borneo and Sarawak understood about politics. And this often creates a very complicated negotiation between Malaya, Britain, Singapore, Indonesia, and the Philippines to allow for the merger. You have to remember at that period of time, the Philippines and Indonesia were against the formation of Malaysia. So they were doing everything in their power to stop the merger or to delay it. And of course, you know what transpires immediately after Malaysia is formed with the confrontasi on the borders of Sabah and Sarawak. Reading historical documents, anybody can read historical documents. Reading it is fine, but understanding what the documents are telling you, what the narratives are in the documents, is the hard part. And so you need to read through the documents very carefully. You have to understand what's going on at that particular period of time. And then you need to present them as accurately and as honestly as possible, based on what the diplomats and intelligence officers are observing and what they're reporting internally to their political leaders at the highest levels of power. I've taken the trouble to isolate specific aspects and areas of this research to share with you, as they are new discoveries, and they were never meant for public viewing or knowledge. In 1956, a significant event takes place. It led to the reasons why Britain ended colonial rule across the world. Britain and France began military action against a sovereign nation, Egypt.
I'm utterly convinced that the action we have taken is right.
This is a war over who will run this Egyptian waterway, the Suez Canal, and the vital oil supplies which are transported through it. Suez is a crisis which will push the world to the brink of nuclear catastrophe.
That moment I did think this is really going to be.
In Britain, we know Suez is a war based on a Prime Minister's lie, a lie which destroys him. But seen from the other side, Suez is a story of how a small, poor Arab country defended itself against the Western world and won.
Now, this military action was not sanctioned by the United Nations, nor the United States, which was a partner in NATO. And so this attempt was seen as reckless. It was an embarrassing military defeat for Great Britain and France in what was a very, very poorly thought out solution to a diplomatic problem between Egypt and both these Western nations. This attack on Egypt was seen as an outdated version of colonialism by trying to force a sovereign Arab nation like Egypt to bow down to the European powers. It was poor diplomacy on the part of Britain and France. And I think United States was also angered by this military action, as Egypt had diplomatic and military ties with the Soviet Union at that period of time. And therefore, this military action was probably harmful to everyone in the midst of a Cold War between the NATO nations and the Soviet Union. There was always this great danger the Soviets would see this as a direct attack on a partner by NATO. Anyways, the Suez Canal debacle brought down this particular British government, and more significantly, it led to a very serious economic problem for Great Britain, as the British economy suffered the loss of millions in cash reserves. There was a danger of the devaluation of the British pound sterling currency, and it led to both internal and external economic panic. What followed was that many smaller nations lobbied for the United Nations to take affirmative action, and Britain was pressured and forced at the diplomatic level and as a foreign policy to give up all its colonial territories globally in 1960 when the Colonial Foreign Rule Resolution was passed by the United Nations, which essentially meant that colonialism was a violation of human rights.
The tipping point came on Wednesday, the 3rd of February, 1960.
The wind of change is blowing through this continent. And whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact.
British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan delivered a warning shot.
And so the departure from colonial rule begins. If you look at this list, which I'm sharing with you, of nations that had who were given independence, you will note that some regions or territories are forced to co-join or are absorbed by neighbors, such as North Cameroon, which was absorbed by Nigeria, Southern Cameroon, which became the Republic of Cameroon, Aden becomes a part of Saudi Arabia, and North Borneo and Sarawak, together with Malaya and Singapore, formed a new nation called Malaysia. So the North Borneo and Sarawak experience of merging was not exclusive at that time. It would seem to have happened to a few other territories. Now, the process of decolonization, if you look at the list I'm sharing, began in January 1956, and it continues all the way for at least 10 years to give independence to 22 territories around the world. And so I have begun laying the foundation for you in part 1 of this series on why Britain had to give up colonial rule globally as part of the steps leading to the diplomatic and intelligence reports that you'll be hearing in part 2. In order to better understand what the key documents are telling us and where the narratives are coming from with regards to decolonization and merger. What the documents merely do is reconfirm with us with regards to regional and global events that shape this process of decolonization of North Borneo, and then why the merger has to happen. And so by the mid-1950s, a number of realities were happening in the world around North Borneo, which we must be aware of. Before we talk about decolonization, before we talk about independence, and before we get to the topic of a Borneo bloc, or independence, or merger. Communism has spread its wings within Southeast Asia. Malaya and Britain are fighting a communist insurgency in the jungles of Malaya in the mid-1950s. Indonesia has sought diplomatic and military ties with China and the Soviet Union at the same period of time. And so once you get to the early 1960s, Indonesia under Sukarno has a rather powerful army and a powerful air force. It's the most modern air force of bombers in the region amongst Southeast Asian nations, with the exception of Vietnam. And Indonesia at this point in time, under Sukarno, was looking at including Borneo as part of a greater reimagination of an old Nusantara world. So he had in his mind somehow convincing the leaders of Sarawak and North Borneo to participate in forming a greater Indonesia. The economic cost to administer, to fund, and to maintain the colonies was an expensive project for the British government, and then public opinion turning against Britain. Unlike in the past when Britain was seen as a liberator of Southeast Asian nations from Japanese occupation, by the mid-1950s, global opinion has turned and changed against Britain. And so they are under pressure now to decolonize. However, when you look at the documents from the mid-50s into 1963, for the most part, the natives and the local people of North Borneo and Sarawak are generally happy to be under British administration and British colonial rule. You don't see the sort of backlash that you may have seen, the nationalistic movement in Malaya that led to independence for Malaya from British rule. There are no protests, there are no riots of any sort. There are no political parties in North Borneo. There are no political parties until 1961. UNCO was formed. The end of 1961, USNO was formed. And then you have the formation of Pasuk Mamugun in 1962. So political parties start being formed significantly later and much closer to the date of a merger, and not early on as some people may think. It's the British administrators that are trying to encourage the formation of a Borneo bloc, which I will talk about in part 2 of this series. If North Borneo and Sarawak were to achieve independence, to form some sort of partnership between the two to protect themselves and also to benefit each other economically. Brunei comes into the picture, but that story is a little bit more complicated. So again, I'll explain Brunei's participation in the discussions for a Borneo bloc in part 2 as well.